All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling how to win friends and influence people.
Dale Carnegie, a classic.
Yeah, it's that self-help book everyone seems to have on their shelf, but we're going beyond just having it. We're going to really dig into it, see what makes it tick.
I'm all for it. What gems are we uncovering today from your copy of the book?
Well, first, a quick overview. The book's split into 4 parts. Fundamental techniques in handling people, 6 ways to make people like you, how to win people to your way of thinking, and be a leader. We'll take each section and see what wisdom we can pull out.
Sounds like a plan.
Let's jump right in. The first chapter, if you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. Carnegie throws us a curveball. Starts with this story, kind of chilling actually, about a murderer named Crowley. Even after all his crimes, he still considered himself a good guy, a kind heart, he said.
Right, and that really sets the stage for Carnegie's point about criticism.
Exactly. It just doesn't work. It makes people defensive, hurts their pride.
And that just breeds resentment, not change.
He even quotes this psychologist, Hans Selye, who said, "As much as we thirst for approval, we dread condemnation." Think about it. We're wired to avoid criticism.
So constantly criticizing. It's like you're poking a beehive. You're asking for trouble.
Makes sense. So what's the alternative? Well, Carnegie suggests honest and sincere appreciation.
The good stuff.
And he practices what he preaches. He tells the story about getting a letter, very appreciative, from this German aristocrat who'd used the book's ideas. It really affected Carnegie, showed him how much genuine appreciation matters.
So like a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing the good in others, it can change everything.
And there's this other story, kind of funny actually, about a guy who starts thanking his wife, not for anything specific, just for not criticizing him, and their relationship, it flourishes just from that.
It goes to show, a little gratitude can make a world of difference.
So, less criticism, more appreciation.
Yes.
Got it. But how do we actually influence people? That's where Carnegie's next principle comes in. Arouse in the other person an eager want.
This is where things get interesting. He's saying you can only get someone to do something if you figure out what they want, and then show them how to get it.
He illustrates it with this funny story about Ralph Waldo Emerson and his son. They're trying to get a calf into the barn, pushing, pulling, no luck.
They're so focused on what they want, they're not thinking about the calf at all.
Exactly. Then this housemaid comes along, figures out what the calf wants, to suckle. So she lets it suck on her finger and leads it right into the barn.
It's brilliant. Aligning your goals with theirs, that's the key.
Now you might be thinking, okay, great for calves, but what about people? Well, Carnegie applies this to a business situation. He needs to negotiate a lower rent increase with this hotel manager.
Tricky situation.
Totally. But he realizes the manager's worried about justifying the increase to the owners. So he frames his proposal in a way that addresses those concerns, wins them both over.
It's all about perspective. Finding that sweet spot where everyone benefits.
So we've covered the basics, but how do we go beyond that? How do we make people actually like us? That's part 2 of the book, and it starts with a focus on genuine interest in others.
And he begins with, of all things, his dog.
Tippy, the friendliest dog ever. Carnegie noticed how dogs just naturally show interest in people, making them feel loved, appreciated, and they don't even have to say a word.
Makes you think, right? We humans could learn a thing or two from our furry friends.
He then talks about this magician, Thurston, hugely successful, attributed it all to his genuine interest in people, wanted to give his audience his absolute best.
Not just going through the motions. Really invested in creating something special.
Then there's the story about Edward M. Sykes Jr., a sales rep. He kept a big account simply by talking to everyone in the store. Cashiers, stock clerks, even the janitor.
Just that simple act of showing interest, it made a huge difference.
Speaking of simple acts, Carnegie brings up the power of a smile.
Something we all could use more of these days.
He paints this picture of a doctor's waiting room. Glum faces everywhere, no warmth, no connection.
It's like we've forgotten how to smile at each other.
But then he contrasts that with this story about a baby's smile in a vet's waiting room. The baby smiles, and it changes the whole atmosphere. Everyone starts smiling, connecting.
It's contagious, that's for sure.
And he gives this example of Robert Cryer, who hires a job candidate based on his friendly phone manner. It wasn't even about what he said, but how he said it. That warmth came through.
Even over the phone, that can make a huge impact.
Then there's the stockbroker who decides to smile more. His business booms, his personal life improves, everything changes.
A smile isn't just polite, it's powerful. Building rapport, spreading positivity. Who knew?
So we've got genuine interest, the power of a smile. What's next? Well, something we all struggle with. remembering names.
Ah, yes, that's a tough one.
Carnegie dedicates a whole chapter to it. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language, he says.
Makes sense when you think about it. Your name, it's your identity.
Yeah,
It's personal.
He starts with this guy, Jim Farley, could remember 50,000 names. Can you imagine? Attributed his success to it. People felt valued, respected when he remembered their names.
So it's like you're saying, you're important to me.
It doesn't have to be grand gestures, just using their name when you greet them, remembering their spouse's name, things like that.
The little things go a long way.
But forgetting a name, that can have the opposite effect. He tells this story about a public speaking course in Paris where they misspelled a student's name on his certificate. He was furious.
Ouch, yeah, that's gotta sting.
It shows how much it matters. Forgetting a name, it's like saying, you're not important enough for me to remember.
Not the message you want to send.
And then, to illustrate this further, there's this story about, get this, Andrew Carnegie and the rabbits.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
As a kid, he'd name all the rabbits in his neighborhood. And when he called their names, they'd come running.
Now that's adorable.
All right. But it shows, even back then, he understood. People respond to being recognized, acknowledged,
Right.
and using their name. That's a powerful way to do it.
Simple, yet so effective.
And Carnegie, he jumps right in. A chapter called You Can't Win an Argument uses this story about a dinner party in London. A debate gets heated.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. He was technically right about this Shakespeare quote, but the whole thing, it strained friendships.
Yeah.
Made him realize sometimes being right just isn't worth it.
Winning the argument, but losing the relationship.
Exactly. So how do we avoid those blowouts? He talks about keeping disagreements from becoming arguments, using some tips from bits and pieces.
It's about being open-minded, right? Welcoming different views, finding common ground.
Yeah, not trying to crush the other person with your brilliance.
More like understanding where they're coming from.
That leads to the next chapter. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say, you're wrong. He has this great story about a car salesman.
What do?
Had this unusual tactic for dealing with angry customers. Instead of arguing, he'd say, our dealership. We make tons of mistakes. I'm often ashamed. We might have messed up with you too. Tell me about it.
Wow, that's disarming.
Right. By admitting he could be wrong, he totally changed the dynamic. Customers felt heard.
And I bet that led to more resolutions, less yelling.
You bet. Complaints got handled better. Customers were more loyal. All because he showed respect.
Respect, it really is the foundation of any good relationship, business or personal.
Speaking of respect, there's this cautionary tale about a lawyer. Corrected a Supreme Court justice in public.
Oh no, that's got to be a bad idea.
It was. Technically, he was right, but his bluntness, it damaged his reputation.
You got to be tactful, especially with people in authority.
Big time. How you say something can be just as important as what you say. And sometimes, you just got to admit you're wrong. That's Carnegie's next point. If you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
Hard to do, but so
He
important.
tells a personal story. Walking his dog Rex without a leash against the rules. Police officer stops him. At first, he tries to justify it, but then,
Light bulb moment.
yep, admits he messed up. Officer lets him off with a warning. Shows how powerful honesty can be.
Owning up to your mistakes. Builds trust, shows integrity.
Okay, so we've talked disagreements, admitting faults. But what about leadership? How do we guide others without creating resentment? That's part 4.
Leading without being a jerk, basically.
Pretty much. Carnegie's advice. If you must find fault, this is the way to begin. Start with praise, genuine appreciation, even when you're about to criticize.
Okay, that's interesting. So like a compliment sandwich, but sincere.
Exactly. He uses this story about Charles Schwab. Finds workers smoking under a no-smoking sign. You'd expect him to yell, right?
Oh yeah, lay down the law.
Nope. He gives each worker a cigar, says, appreciate it if you smoke these outside.
Wow, that's smooth.
Yeah,
Gets his point across, but in a positive way.
totally. Shows respect, even when correcting them. Then there's this Sergeant Kaiser. Wants his trainees to have regulation haircuts.
So what, he shaved their heads?
No. He got his own haircut, even though it was already short. Then challenged them to do the same.
Led by example, huh?
Yep. Appealed to their pride, their desire to be the best. And it worked.
It's not about forcing people, it's about inspiring them.
Exactly. That leads to Carnegie's next point. Encourage. Make faults seem easy to correct. People are more likely to improve if they feel supported, capable.
Building them up, not tearing them down.
Exactly. He has this heartwarming story about his niece, Josephine. Not the best secretary at first, but instead of criticizing, he focused on her strengths, gave her guidance.
A little faith goes a long way.
She became a top-notch secretary. It just shows encouragement can work wonders. There's also this story about Kaiser Wilhelm II. Gets upset about a British admiral's remarks, ready to lash out.
Uh-oh, international incident brewing.
His chancellor, von Bülow, smooths things over, praises the Kaiser's naval knowledge, then gently suggests the admiral didn't mean any harm.
Diplomacy at its finest.
Right. Calm the Kaiser down, avoids a diplomatic mess. Then there's this boy labeled a slow learner. Can you guess what happened?
I'm sensing a happy ending.
With support, encouragement, he thrived. Shows how limiting labels can be. We need to see people's potential, not their perceived shortcomings.
Absolutely. Everyone has something to offer.
And that brings us to a crucial point. Let the other person save face. Carnegie's saying even when correcting someone, we got to preserve their dignity.
Don't humiliate them, basically.
Right. Public humiliation, it just leads to resentment. He uses this example of a manager laying off employees. Tough situation, right?
Super tough.
But instead of just handing out pink slips, he expresses appreciation for their work, acknowledges the circumstances, even offers support for finding new jobs.
Showing compassion, even in a difficult situation.
Exactly. It's about treating people with respect, even when delivering bad news.
So how about motivating people to do their best? Any tips on that?
Carnegie's got you covered. Spur people on to success is the next chapter. He starts with his friend, Pete Barlow, train dogs for the circus.
Okay, I'm picturing cute puppies doing tricks.
Barlow was all about positive reinforcement. Lots of praise, treats for even small improvements.
And I bet the dogs loved him.
They did. Learned quickly, performed amazingly, shows how effective positive reinforcement can be. Then there's Enrico Caruso, the famous opera singer.
His voice, it was incredible.
Right. But he came from poverty. It was his mother, her unwavering belief in him, her constant encouragement that pushed him to succeed.
A mother's love and support. Can't beat that.
Then there's Charles Dickens, struggled as a young man. But an editor praised one of his early writings, and that inspired him to keep going.
That little bit of recognition sparked his whole career.
And this young man, stuck in a dead-end job, his mother encouraged him to pursue his passion for art. It's about supporting people's dreams, even if they seem risky.
Believing in them, helping them find their path.
Now let's talk reputation, giving a good reputation to live up to. Carnegie has this story about a hotel manager had a problem employee.
So how'd he fix it?
He praised her publicly for qualities she didn't really possess.
Reverse psychology.
Kind of. This employee, she didn't want to look bad after being praised, so she stepped up her game, became a model employee.
So set high expectations, people will often rise to meet them.
Exactly. Then there's this teacher, transformed a disruptive student into a class leader.
How'd he pull that off?
By publicly praising his leadership potential. Gave him a good reputation to live up to, and the student blossomed.
Our words have power. We can shape people's identities, for better or worse.
Okay, on to making the fault seem easy to correct. Carnegie argues people are more receptive to feedback if they believe improvement is possible.
Not making them feel like failures.
Exactly. He uses this dance instructor as an example. She'd praise her students' natural rhythm even if they were clumsy.
Encouraging them, showing them they have potential.
Right. Made learning seem achievable, boosted their confidence. And Ely Culbertson, the bridge expert?
Didn't he win a ton of championships?
He did, but he was initially unsure of himself. It was his wife, her belief in him, that pushed him to pursue bridge professionally.
Sometimes we need someone else to see our potential before we can see it ourselves.
And finally, the last chapter of Part 4, making people glad to do what you want. Starts with Woodrow Wilson. He needed William Jennings Bryan to be Secretary of State.
Bryan, wasn't he a big deal back then? Former presidential candidate?
Yep, strong personality. But Wilson wanted him for a different role, Secretary of Peace. So he subtly implied that the job was too important for anyone else.
Played to his ego, huh?
Brilliantly. Bryan felt honored, accepted the position. Then there's this guy, negotiates a lower rent increase by praising his landlord, complimenting his management skills.
A little flattery goes a long way.
As long as it's sincere, right?
Yeah.
It worked. The landlord was more receptive to his request.
Shows the importance of building rapport, being appreciative.
And this manager, a photographer, is there to document what seems like an inefficient process. Instead of getting defensive, the manager explains the situation, emphasizes the company's usual efficiency.
Transparency and honesty.
It worked, satisfied the photographer, prevented bad publicity. Then there's this bank manager. A potential customer is hesitant to give personal info.
I bet he wanted to open an account.
He did, but instead of pushing, the manager listens to his concerns, appeals to his sense of fairness, highlights the benefits of the account.
Patience and understanding. That's how you build trust.
It worked. The customer opened the account. So much to learn from these stories, but we're not done yet. Next up, empathy time. Be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires.
Walking in their shoes, seeing things from their side.
Carnegie tells this story about a guy trying to sell fuel to a chain store, but he didn't like chain stores. So instead of a hard sell, he asked the executive for help, said he needed to prepare for a debate on the merits of chain stores.
Smart move. Turned a rival into a resource.
Right. The executive helped him, they built rapport, and guess what? He got the chain store's business. Common ground, it can work wonders.
Shows you, even when you disagree, you can still find ways to connect.
And sometimes, sympathy is as simple as asking for advice. This woman, she was frustrated her husband didn't appreciate her gardening. Instead of complaining, she asked for his input.
Oh, I like that. Makes them feel involved.
And it worked. He started appreciating her work more. It's like, if you want something done, ask a busy person.
So true. And sometimes sympathy means just owning up when you mess up. Carnegie gives this example of a manager dealing with a furious customer.
Oh boy, those can be tough.
Instead of arguing, the manager just apologizes. Says, "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience." That's it.
Calm the customer right down. Apologies, they can be powerful. Okay, so we've seen sympathy in action, building relationships, influencing people. But Carnegie takes it a step further. Appeal to the nobler motives.
Aim high.
He says people respond better when we appeal to their values, their ideals, not just their self-interest.
So not just what's in it for me, but what's the right thing to do.
Exactly. He talks about this salesman collecting overdue payments. Instead of demanding money, he appealed to their sense of fairness, honesty. Said it was about helping the company fix a mistake.
Makes them feel like they're part of the solution.
And it worked. He got paid, and the customer relationship stayed strong.
Powerful stuff. People want to do good, be seen as good.
Okay, final chapter. Dramatize your ideas. Now we're talking presentation.
Make it memorable.
He tells this story about a salesman dumps 32 jars of cold cream on a client's desk.
Whoa, that's a visual.
Right. Each jar represented a competitor. Talk about a dramatic way to illustrate the market. He also talks about challenges, throwing down the gauntlet.
Gets people fired up.
Theodore Roosevelt decides to run for governor of New York after someone challenges his courage. That appeal to his sense of honor, it pushed him to action.
A little provocation can be a good thing sometimes.
And of course, Carnegie wouldn't be Carnegie without emphasizing praise. Tells this story about a supervisor, had a shy employee, gave her a tough assignment, expressed confidence in her.
Belief can be a powerful motivator.
She exceeded expectations. Sometimes people just need to know someone believes in them.
And that wraps up How to Win Friends and Influence People. What a ride.
So many great insights. What really hit home for you?
You know, that genuine appreciation thing, it's so basic, but so profound. A little appreciation can change everything.
Totally agree. And that focus on seeing things from the other person's point of view. It's not about tricks or manipulation. It's about understanding, finding common ground.
It's like he gives us a roadmap for better conversations, stronger relationships. So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to ponder. Carnegie talks about influencing others, but what about influencing ourselves?
Interesting. Could we use those same principles? Like, could we arouse in ourselves an eager want to achieve our goals?
Absolutely. This whole deep dive has been about winning friends and influencing people. But maybe the most important relationship is the one we have with ourselves.
Well said. We'd love to hear your thoughts, listeners. What were your aha moments? Any stories about using these techniques? Share them with us.
We're always excited to connect with our fellow deep divers. Thanks for joining us on this journey into how to win friends and influence people.
Until next time,